This week, cuts and consequences. Short on staff, class sizes larger, and a $10 million funding gap for special needs assistance, the school district continues to face criticism for cost cutting, which it affirms was inevitable.
Unfortunately, we'll see higher class sizes as a result of this.
With a lack of resources in state funding, the school board approving a $35 million budget reduction that cut hundreds of staff and other costs.
And you're looking at already an increased need of our students. It's terrifying to me.
Those decisions sparking student protests, including an entire school walkout at Fort Vancouver to the district office.
We want the district to be honest with us about why our teachers are getting cut and why our programs are leaving. This is going to affect the rest of our school lives.
And one student protest here at River in the spring.
I think there for sure are issues within the district that need to be addressed.
With their frustration, the desire for answers, the district laying the blame on the state legislature for inadequate funding and rampant inflation. Superintendent Snell and other leaders emphasizing their understanding of students' frustrations over reductions which they had delayed for over 2 years.
They care about their teachers, so yeah, respect that.
Dr. Jeff Snell joins me in studio for an exclusive conversation to address the tough decisions made and the path forward. Joining me to provide insight and analysis is CR News editor and staff writer Emmy McGill, whose recent article examines the impact of budget cuts on programs and students here at River. How will cost cutting impact the future of education? And is it a price worth paying? Welcome to the conversation. It's the Rapids Report.
From CR News, this is the Rapids Report with Talan Collins.
We're asking for more funds to help educate our future, to help us better ourselves.
We are getting budget cuts from the legislative, but we know we can't go all the way up to Olympia and talk about this to them directly, but we can get our voices heard.
We're going to be the ones who are changing the world for the future.
And a good Friday afternoon, and thank you for joining us as we take a deeper look into an issue which strikes at the core of our education experience, the very programs and teachers which have shaped our personal and intellectual growth. First, the facts. In March of this year, the Vancouver Public Schools Board of Directors approved of over $35 million in budget reductions. Those board members and other leaders have insisted that the cuts were in response to a deficit they blame on insufficient funding from the state, in combination with factors such as the exhaustion of pandemic-era relief funding and rampant inflation. In response to the district's decision, students at Fort Vancouver High School walked out in protest of the staffing cuts which they said would disproportionately impact their school. The most racially diverse, Fort Vancouver has the highest percentage of low-income students amongst high schools in our district. Advocating for an English teacher he heard would be cut the following school year, then senior Jose Gomez told the Columbian that the loss of staff would, quote, put more of a load on other teachers, which would limit his overall learning experience. He added that it's, quote, important to have role models, to have teachers that we can relate to. Holding signs that read "Save Our Staff," just days later, River students led their own walkout. Following in Fort Vancouver's footsteps, leaders within River's ASB organized and led more than 100 students to the school's reader board alongside 99th Street.
$5 million of programs and materials is being cut, which is really concerning. Our sports and arts programs here at River are still developing, and to just cut them off is heartbreaking.
Anything that we can do, even if it's just simply wearing a red shirt, will just amplify the movement.
Many students held painted signs, many of which read "Fund Our Future." Also on the sidewalk, Superintendent Dr. Jeff Snell, who was invited to attend the walkout by the event's organizers. In my interview with Dr. Snell, he explained he wanted to be out there to understand what students are focused on. He wanted to say that while he totally empathizes with the students' concerns, the district no longer has the reserve funds and federal pandemic relief dollars that once sustained staffing levels. ASB's Mayo DePaul and Emerson Haney, who led the event, say there's a larger issue at hand.
I think there for sure are issues within the district that need to be addressed. You don't have to be on like equity teams in ASB or on like any of these boards to contribute or to like make a change. It really, like, you just have to be able to speak up and choose to speak up.
You have the power and you can make the change. If you want to make the change and you can do it.
even if that change is holding a sign. And Dr. Snell, standing alongside and speaking with those student protesters, said at the time, quote, "These are amazing staff who have built strong relationships and care deeply about our students. It's powerful to see students advocating for them." But the impact of the district's budget cuts have since gone beyond staff. In September, Vancouver Public Schools announced in a statement that it would, quote, "no longer be automatically paying for IB and AP exam fees for all students." However, the district did reiterate its commitment to covering those exam costs for students who meet low-income eligibility requirements. In a comprehensive article published by CR News earlier this week, Rivers IB Diploma and Career-Related Program Coordinator Julie Nygaard tells our Emmy McGill that she worries the change will have a negative effect on the IB program and its accessibility. She fears the cost burden will, quote, "reduce the number of IB exams each CP and course candidate has registered for and will complete, and that some students need to pay in excess of $700 for their exams." Later on in this episode, I'll be joined by Emmy for analysis on her piece, which helped lay the groundwork for my exclusive conversation with our superintendent. And joining me now here on set is the superintendent of Vancouver Public Schools, Dr. Jeff Snell. Dr. Snell, thank you so much for your time and for joining me here today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you, and welcome to the Rapids Report. I want to get started right on the issue at hand. After nearly a decade of covering the costs of IB and AP exams for students district-wide, the district announced in early September that it would no longer pay for those costs for most students. Many parents and teachers have since voiced their criticism that the announcement came too late. Why wasn't this decision announced or perhaps made earlier when the other costs and budgeting decisions were made back in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think anytime you're going to change something that happens, your communication plan around what that looks like is always really important. And I think you can always learn from however that rolls out or whatever that looks like. So, you know, the timeliness of it, I think some people were frustrated about it. I think when we look at what we were communicating in the spring, most of our focus was on staff decisions and, you know, lots of energy around courses that we're trying to continue to roll and run, those kinds of things. So I think the next layer was looking at like these kinds of potential savings. The challenge with like AP, IB, college in the classroom, one is like the state is starting to fund more college in the classroom kinds of experiences. So when we look at how do we make our dollars go as far as they can for kids' impact, you know, those are areas that have expanded since the practice was to kind of cover the costs of all AP and IB. And then the other thing that stood out about our practice compared to other districts is we covered the cost for everybody, regardless of need. And that's not a practice that's common in other districts. If there is a need, then covering those costs is a common practice. And that's something, too, that in rolling it out in September, trying to be really clear that like we're not wanting to police who has need or not. We just need to know if people have need, and then we're going to cover those costs for them. But in general, when we look at all the reductions across the board and all the different activities that we have, like continuing to like subsidize that for everyone was going to be something that we weren't going to be able to continue for the long term. So that's kind of how it all factored into the...
Why was the decision made during that time period when the staffing decisions were announced?
No, not during the staffing time. Most of the energy from probably until the end of May was focused on staff and meeting with all the impacted staff and trying to determine, one, if we can place them again, two, just trying to honor where they're at and the dignity of like having somebody tell you that you're losing your job. And so really when we started to go to the next layer of decisions was late in the school year. And part of the challenge is like knowing when people are going to be ready to receive the communication. Our experience is usually at the end of the school year, people are kind of moving on. And so thinking about the September time was, you know, trying to figure out when we have everybody that's going to be there, be back, be going to the school year. Again, I think we can always do things differently and better, right? In hindsight, you can always look at stuff, and you should always look at decisions that were made and plans that were put into place and how you can do better by that. But I think ultimately also feeling like, you know, we're going to support anybody that has a need.
As far as the timeline when that decision was ultimately announced in September, Seniors here at River were already enrolled in classes. How would you respond to those students and then teachers of those IB classes who feel that the district's decision was unfair in the sense that it, is affecting these students who were already invested in this program and had already enrolled in those classes by that point in September?
Yeah, I think if it impacted them individually, I would just apologize to them that it had that impact, right? I think we always need to own the outcomes of what we're trying to do. I think it's not unlike lots of other conversations I've had around the district that people are invested in something and it's changed. I think it's a real challenge when you have to reduce a budget that big that you're going to have these impacts that our school board certainly doesn't want. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants classes larger, all those things. And I think when you go through that process, like there are also places where you think you might have the communication where it needs to be, and then it turns out you didn't, right? And so you just need to think about that and figure out in the next, hopefully we don't have reductions of that level again, but I'm not necessarily seeing solutions from the state at this point. And so, if we're at a point in, 5 years from now where we have to talk about, closing schools because they're too small, or we have to think about consolidating programs, all these are like experiences that hopefully allow us to do that better as we move forward. I also know that whenever you're making these kinds of decisions, sometimes, regardless of the communication, people are going to be unhappy because they disagree with the decision, and I understand that and appreciate that. And that's because it's hard, right? If it wasn't hard, then it probably we didn't have the need for it in the beginning. And I felt like with all these budget reductions, like we have needed that staff. We have needed these opportunities. And so that's the part that just like, I didn't get into this work to take things away, right? I get into this work to try to help, and so that's the part that's really challenging.
If the decision was announced near the end of the last school year, as I'm picking up, would you have gone back in time and would you have announced that decision earlier, or do you stand by the timing of when?
I think anybody that says I stand by whatever isn't thoughtful about. Anytime somebody has an experience that isn't what you wanted, then I'm always thinking about, well, how could we do that differently, right? So, given that, certainly this is an item that River has attention, this is not an item that I hear about across the district, right? There's other items I hear about more frequently, but understanding that and appreciating that, like, I think there's always room to do things better, right? So whether it's announcing it in the spring or having a different way of rolling it out, I feel like a lot of energy in this particular one was around, like, I don't have this covered anymore. And in our intention, it was like, no, like anybody that has a need, we're going to figure this out for you. We just can't go across the board and just cover this for everybody when we're eliminating all these other, positions and programming, like the elementary skillery kinds of things that I mentioned. So that part, it feels like there was, we didn't get that message out clear enough to people because people kept like, I can't afford this, or, this isn't, well, then we'll try to help you, right? So
back in March, you were invited to attend a student-led protest over the impact of those initial budget cuts announced in the spring here at River and across the district. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of protests like that one?
Well, first of all, I got to meet you at that, right? I think any chance that we have to meet and talk about concerns and fears and priorities is always really important. I was proud of our students. This affects them, and I saw a lot of involvement and care. I saw a lot of commitment to their staff, which is super awesome to see, right? Because that's what you want. You want students and staff that really care deeply about each other, and that's what I heard. I think my job as superintendent is always to carry. I feel like I'm carrying people's voice with me all the time, and trying to find the appropriate places within our community to leverage that voice to benefit the students that we serve. And so every experience I have, this interview, those protests, right, I'm just trying to listen and think about, like, how is this affecting people? Next week I have a presentation to a community organization called Rotary, right? These are a bunch of mostly retired people in the community that care deeply about it. Like, I always try to carry voice to them to make them understand the impact of some of these things, and hopefully have them advocate on behalf of public education and the students in our community. So those were all really powerful experiences. I think one was really telling for me because I was principal at Fort Vancouver, and so when you're a principal at a school, you never stop being principal at that school. Like, it's really near and dear to your heart. And so to meet with the students at Fort and to hear their frustration, it really felt like I had went full circle. Like, here I was their advocate at Fort, and now I'm a part of removing staff from them, right? That was just it was kind of emotional, right? To think about, am I doing the work that I want to be doing? Am I doing enough? All those questions that I think are really important for us always to answer about whatever work we do, right? Are we doing enough? Are we doing the right work? And so I think those student protests really challenged me to continue to think about the work that we do and how we can do it better together.
Yeah, and one of the things you told me in our interview during that protest while that was taking place, you talked about your efforts and the school board's efforts to advocate at the state level for increased funding. I'm wondering if you can elaborate upon that for our viewers now, as well as what you believe, what more needs to be done, and how can the community support those efforts?
Really good question. I'm glad I said that in the interview. So first, my job is to do outreach first, and so when it's not the legislative session, which is this fall, and before elections, I reach out to candidates and I reach out to people that are currently holding office, and I set up times to meet with them. I leave it up to them, like in person, Zoom, whatever works for you, phone call. Do you want to come see a school? And there's a range of what that looks like. So some do come into our schools. So I hosted some of them this fall in some of our schools. Some of them just respond to the email kind of request, thank you. I help the board identify priorities that they adopt in a legislative platform, and so that happened in October. And so that platform is around special education staffing and the non-staff costs like insurance and utilities that I mentioned to you. And then we use that platform with all of our elected officials as well. And so any conversation we have, we bring that platform forward and we talk about what would help, what wouldn't help. We also do outreach across districts because there's power in people being consistent. So this is the first time I've felt across the state that that's a really unifying message. In my career, it's never been like this. So if you were to go to a different district and ask these same questions, they would tell you special ed, they would tell you insurance, they would tell you staffing, right? And we're trying to be very uniform in that approach so our legislators get a clear message because it's hard for them. I'm sure they have a lot of people that tell them what they should and shouldn't do, and we want to be really consistent with that. We're hosting a legislative forum on Friday as a region, and so I'm the facilitator of that. And we invite as many, sometimes lots show up, sometimes not many show up. And then once the session starts, I always try to have like an open door where I just check in with legislators because sometimes they'll get like a proposed bill or something and they're not necessarily sure. And I always want them to know that they can call me or they can ask a question and get our perspective. And then I testify on certain bills, either pro, neutral, or against. And that's different now because you can do that via Zoom. So it allows me to kind of still be superintendent and not drive up to Olympia and miss the whole day, and to kind of give my perspective on that. I think you had asked like what other people and what people should know.
Yeah.
They hear from me all the time. So it's really important to hear from other voices in the community. I think it gets their attention differently. I think the student protests got their attention. Like people asked me about that, and I shared what the energy was, why it was, right? All those things. So the more that if you're passionate about IB test fees, right? Like reach out and advocate. Like maybe that's a bill that all those could be funded across the state. If you're passionate about the student class size ratio or whatever it is, like share. If you're passionate about extracurriculars, right? Take a minute to shoot an email or show up at one of the town halls and let them know. I think a lot of times we as adults make a lot of decisions as what happens to you. Right? And that's based on a lot of experience and hopefully wisdom and thoughtfulness. but you also need a voice in that in terms of what you think is important. So I would encourage people to reach out.
You touched upon this when you were explaining your experience as a principal at Fort Vancouver. In your view, as the superintendent of Vancouver Public Schools, what has been the most difficult part, perhaps for you personally, when dealing with these budget cuts?
Yeah, I met with probably like 60 plus teachers that lost their job, like individually, and have them tell me about why they should keep their job, and they're really good reasons, right? Like, these are great people that really, they want to do the work, they believe in the work, they formed really strong relationships. Most of those people would say, I'm just worried about my students, we've established this, or we're doing this, and so not being able to say yes to that, like, that sucked. Like, it just, you want to, as I mentioned earlier, help people, and then you're in this position where it's really difficult to say yes, right? So that's a tough part of the job, but also, like, I have a tremendous opportunity and responsibility. Like, the reason I said yes to this job wasn't because I thought it was easy and there was easy stuff coming. It was because I care about this community. I think I'm a good person that wants to help people. I know there's difficult things, so I'll put myself in there and try to help to the best of my ability, and just kind of move as much as I can in the time and the opportunities I'm given. And if that changes and I'm not given that opportunity, I want to look back and say, I did everything I could to make a difference. And there's certainly lots of things I could look back, not just as my superintendent career, but throughout, where I wish I'd have done this, or I wish I'd have taken advantage of that opportunity. I just want to have as minimal of those kinds of reflections as possible, because so many people have poured into me and given me this chance. And so it's like when you ask, yeah, of course I'm here. I want to talk to you. I want to learn from you, right? So it's a tough job, and there's things that I'm disappointed about, but I'm also very fortunate that I get a chance to serve in this way for as long as I have. And each day I wake up, I want to be a little better than I was the day before, right? And I really do believe that we can make the world better by being better, each of ourselves, right? Each day with whatever opportunity we have.
And looking back to when those initial budget cuts were first announced, is there any one specific thing that you now think you would have done differently?
I think it's sharing the problem. I tried to, having young adults now who are teenagers, my twins, we'd have a lot of these conversations where it would be I'd be telling something to them, and then all of a sudden they'd say, wait, what? Right? They would pay attention. And I feel sometimes with these really difficult news, you can talk about it for a couple years. You can say we're using ESSER funds to not make these reductions, but it's really hard to get people's attention. And so, I always think back to how could we have gotten more attention, right? How could we have helped? Because a lot of times people are saying I wish I'd have known more, or I wish I'd have, and I'm reflecting, man, we were talking about this, right? But it wasn't necessarily capturing people's attention in the same way. And I understand that anytime there's a difficult decision, that's when people will pay attention. So I'm always reflecting back on how did we roll this out? What did this look like, right? So those are always opportunities I feel I could do better as I reflect on big complex challenges that I've had the opportunity to navigate.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Snell.
Great questions.
And, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Just ahead, I'll be joined on set by CR News' Emmy McGill to break down my conversation with Dr. Snell in her article on the impact of district budget cuts here at River. That's next in 60 seconds. Welcome back. Joining me now on set is CR News editor and staff writer Emmy McGill. Emmy, welcome to the Rapids Report.
Thank you for having me.
One of the things you talk about in your article, you highlight concerns from both teachers and students about the transparency and ultimately the timing of the district's communication. How do you feel that Dr. Snell addressed some of those concerns? Do you think that his response was enough?
Honestly, I'd like to see better communication in the future. I think communication is the forefront of any problem. You're going to have to talk to families, and I think having families more involved throughout the process of it, not just towards the end once they're actually being implemented, especially with like the IB exams not being covered anymore. A big part of that is that families felt like they were told too late. Students had already committed to those classes, they had already enrolled, so they felt kind of blindsided by that. So I think having them a part of the decision sooner, telling them, hey, this is a possibility instead of just this is happening now, would be helpful.
Yeah, and I'm also curious, a teacher you cited mentioned that there's this disconnect between those decision makers and those at the quote point of delivery. From your analysis, how do you think that the district can bridge this communication gap?
I think the biggest part is just asking students, asking teachers, getting their opinions. I mean, especially teachers, they're at the forefront of what is actually being affected. They're the ones that are having more work on their plate, more students to take care of. And I think it's really difficult, especially when they're having more students in each class, to have those one-on-one connections with students. I think that's really important. And obviously our teachers are doing the best that they can with what they have.
How do you think that these changes are affecting the quality of your education and the education of your peers, and ultimately the morale of both students and staff here in the building?
Yeah, I remember last spring being in class, and a lot of my peers were really panicked when they first found out about the staffing and all of the staff that are being cut. They were worried that their favorite teachers were going to get cut. I feel like the panic is not so much the issue now, but I do feel like I said before, that it's teachers being able to form those one-on-one connections with students. It's teachers being able to support each and every student when they have 35 plus kids in every class. It's just difficult with 1 hour class periods to get to everybody.
Yeah, and the potential reduction in IB exam coverage has stirred frustration among students and parents. Based on Dr. Snell's remarks in my interview with him and Ms. Nygaard's insights from your research, do you believe that the district is doing enough to support the IB program amid these budget constraints?
Yeah, I think the most difficult part of this issue is the context of it. I mean, a lot of students and families just immediately assumed as soon as they heard that it wasn't going to be covered anymore, that it wasn't going to be covered for anybody. And that caused a wide range of panic because, like Ms. Nygaard says, of them having to pay upwards of $700 for exams, not every family can afford that. And that's a huge barrier towards students getting this advanced education and being able to participate in this amazing program that we have the opportunity for at our school.
Yeah, and Dr. Snell encouraged students to use their voices to advocate for their education at events like the protest which he witnessed in March. In your view, what are the most effective ways for students to make their concerns heard by administration and ultimately lawmakers at the state level?
Definitely. I think peaceful protests like that happened last spring is a really effective way. It's gathering students together. In a way, it creates a sort of community where you're working together to help advocate for yourself and your education. But also in the state of Washington, there's a hotline that goes straight to legislators to leave messages on anything that you want to share your opinion with. And all of our state legislators' emails are public. So just having someone in your family or you or teachers reaching out to legislators and just advocating for yourself, I think a lot of students think that they're below that. That the legislators aren't going to listen or disagree, and that could be the case, but you're going to fail automatically if you don't go for that, if you don't try at all. So I'd say the most important part is just students getting out there and just sending that email, even if they think it might not get read.
Yeah, even the smallest impact, can create
Exactly.
change. Okay, well, Emmy, thank you so much for your time and for joining me here on the Rapids Report.
Absolutely, thank you for having me.
Well, that is our show for this Friday. I'm Talan Collins. Elijah Guerin will be here for our next episode to tackle the issue of social media use and cell phone policy in schools. As always, the conversation continues because here at CR News, the Rapids Report. Hey Rapids, thanks for helping us reach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. If you haven't already, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the CRTV YouTube channel to support content for and by CR students. Thanks for watching.